So as a general introduction to 3ds Max, I just want to give you guys a tour of the program. And don't worry too much if it goes too fast or you don't understand or something like that, because we're just looking around. We'll go back and each part of this that we're going through, we'll look at in greater detail later. Um, And generally speaking, the learning curve on this program is pretty steep in the beginning. Don't just hang in there. Don't worry. It'll all eventually make sense just as you become familiar with it. So anyway, here I am in the program, and you want to, if possible, also open up 3ds Max, and so you can watch a little bit of the video and then go and look and see if you can find all the places and do the same thing yourself in the program. So we have, and everything in this program, by the way, can be modified to be different. It's a very open and editable program. You could even has its own programming language. You could write your own tools if you don't like the way the ones work here. I mean, if you're into that kind of thing. But anyway, so the way I'm showing it to you is the default way things work. So we have, we're working in three-dimensional space, right? And we generally have 4 windows into this space. And if you look in the upper left corner, there's little labels. So this is the perspective view. Usually I keep one view for, like 3-dimensional, like this perspective or camera view. And here, this is the front view, looking at our object from the front. Or this one up here is the top view, looking at it from the top, or from the left side. But I can make this left or right. I can change it to top or bottom. See, if I click on this, you'll see there's top, bottom, front, back, left, right, and if there's a keyboard shortcut, it's down the right side. So, but this is a perfectly fine way to work like this. So that's just our viewports. And when you're working in 3 dimensions, you need to be able to see all sides of it. You can't just work at it from one angle, because it's trying to make a sculpture just by never walking around the sculpture. It's difficult to do. So over here on the right side, we have there's what is it, 6 tabs up there, but there's only 2 that we really care about: create and modify, okay? And this is where you can also create up here in the main menu, but nobody does that. This is where I'll always be showing you how to do it. So we create objects in the Create tab, and we modify them. Once they're created and we want to make a change to them, we modify them in the Modify area. So let's just briefly look at all the different types of things that can be made. So the first button, each one of these areas has a lot of nested stuff underneath it. So the first button is standard primitives. Primitives means just basic volumetric shapes like spheres and cubes and stuff like that. And they're all parametric objects, meaning they're described by their parameters: radius, height, things like that. So there we have standard primitives, and if I click on that, you'll see there's all these other types of shapes you can make. Extended primitives, that's just more basic shapes. Compound objects are Boolean functions and scattering objects on a surface, things like that. Particle systems, patch grids, body objects. There's things for doors and windows down here. There's some shrubbery, all kinds of stuff. And this list might be a little bit different on your machine than mine, because I have a certain amount of plugins and things like that. But anyway, so that's our standard primitive types. And then if I move to the right here, okay, I'm just going to go through these quickly. Then if I move to the right once, that's shapes, okay, 2-dimensional shapes, splines. Just if you've used Adobe Illustrator, they're vectors, okay? And we use those to extrude or lathe volumetric objects. And if you click on that, you'll see there's a variety of different types of splines. NURBS, non-uniform rational B-splines, compound shapes, things like that. But generally here, it's just, I think splines is the only one we'll use. Moving over to the right again is lights. Okay, we need to, our scene will be illuminated with default lights in the beginning, but as you create a scene, you'll want to make your own lights, so you have control over that. And photometric lights, and then standard lights. Corona, I don't think you have that because I have the Corona renderer installed. And then Arnold is another renderer in 3ds Max. So there's lights specific for those. We'll be using standard lights. Okay. And here's the different types of standard lights. Moving on over to the right again, we have cameras. Okay. A camera, you just basically set it up so you have a repeatable point to render from. So when you're creating some composition, a 3D image, you always are rendering from the same spot instead of just wherever the perspective viewport happens to be. And then we have some just various helper type objects, forces. These are, and if you look there, there's a bunch of types of forces. These are mostly for blowing around or modifying particle systems. There's a few other purposes, but mostly that's what those are for. And then there's just some utilities here, systems. Anyway, so mostly what we're doing is just standard primitives. That's what we'll start with. Standard primitives, splines, lights, and cameras. That's all we really care about. So let's just make a box. So if I just go to box there and then just click and drag in my perspective viewport, I have a box. And if I keep dragging around the viewport, it's going to make more boxes. So what you usually do once you make something is just go up here and hit select and move. Okay. So right up there at the top of the program is select and move, select and rotate, select and scale. Okay. Those are your basic transforms. And if I'm not actively creating some object, I'm usually in select and move. Okay, so, and if I want to, I can make my active viewport. See, if I click on a viewport, it activates it. See how it gets a yellow border around it, okay? If I have an object selected and I want to if I go and click on some other viewport, it drops the selection of the object. So if I want to activate a different viewport without deselecting the object, you just use the right mouse button to activate the viewport instead of the left mouse button. All right, and then when I'm in select and move, you should have this gizmo. Okay, it's called a gizmo, that's the term. And to constrain your movement. And I would recommend always using the gizmo, like when you move something, make sure you're right on the red, green, or blue arrowhead. So you're moving it on one direction, on one axis at a time. Particularly when you're new to working in 3D, it's easy to get kind of disorganized and messed up. So, you know, that way you know what direction you're moving in. If you just click on the object and drag around, it's actually going to, when you use the gizmo, the gizmo is like sticky and it remembers where you, which direction you were last constrained in. But if you hadn't used the gizmo, it wouldn't do that. Anyway, so it can move the object around, okay, by an axis, or if I click on this, there's like 3 panels inside the gizmo here, and that gives me, it moves on a plane. It's still constrained, but to 2 axes instead of 1. So we can move objects around. If we want to rotate it, okay, I go to select and rotate, and here's my rotate gizmo, okay? And rotates X, Y, or Z, or around the direction of the viewer, if that makes sense. So when you're rotating in 3ds Max, I would recommend always having angle snap turned on. Because if I'm rotating some amount, it's rotating by, you know, a decimal hundredths of a point. And if I rotate in 3 different directions, it's very difficult to get an object back to be perfectly unrotated. And generally, you want to work on objects not rotated, just so you can use symmetry modifiers and things like that, where just to make it easier, so things are lined up more easily. So anyway, when you're using select and rotate, I would recommend always having angle snap turned on. See that right there? Just I work with that turned on all the time, every day. And I only turn it off if I need it off, because it's much more often that you want it on. So when I rotate now, you can look and you will see, if you look on your screen, I'm rotating in the perspective viewport, you should see a little number there, and it's going by 5 degrees, right? Up to 180 and 360, right? And you should also see that down below and down in this area. So it'll be near the gizmo and in this bottom area, just where random values can appear. Okay. A nice thing about 3ds Max that once you get used to it, you'll wish that all programs did this is, okay, so is this way that you can use the right mouse button. So right now I'm dragging with the left mouse button, right? And I'm thinking, this was a bad idea. I don't want to do this at all. And I can just, while I'm keeping the left mouse button down, I can just, with my other finger, whack the right mouse button, and it pops back to where it was before you started, which is really useful. I use that all the time. Okay, so we made an object, and let's go into modify now. So we go over to our modify panel, and here we see the box and its parameters, okay? Length, width, and height. And my units of measure is meters, because I was just using that in this program, but yours is probably doesn't have meters on there, the M. It probably is just in generic max units, which is no specific size. It's kind of like a meaningless unit, but that's the default, which is fine. It's fine to work that size. So I can change the length, width, or height of the object, okay, just by, when you have a little spinner like this, you can click on it and drag up or down. It's easier than clicking on it to slowly go up, right? You can click right on the spinner. The spinner is the up and down arrow, and just drag on it, okay? Also, if you right click on a spinner, it zeroes it out, or goes to the least possible value. And so if there's also select and rotate, select and scale, and here's the scale gizmo, right? But if possible, it's always superior to scale using the parameters than, or to change the object using the parameters rather than scale. Because scale in the 3D world is a little bit weird. It kind of creates changes to the object that will follow you along. And if the object has parameters, just change its parameters here instead of scaling it. Okay. And then so on a box, the parameters are just length, width, and height, and then length segments, width segments, and height segments. So they may not show. Let's see. So if you want to see edges, you'll notice that this viewport is shaded, and these ones are wireframe, which is the default. But that can all be changed, of course, too. But I'm going to turn on show edges on the shaded one, which is the shortcut is F4. Okay. See how the edges have lines on them? And to turn that on up here, if you forget the F4 is edged faces. Okay. So let's see what more segments look like. Okay, see if I drag it up and down, here's more length segments, more width. Okay, or all 3. So I can create segments. The only reason to do that, if it's just going to be a box, it's not aided at all by having a bunch of segments on the face. You only want those if you're going to bend it or deform it or do something like that. Which would be putting a modifier on it. Which we will do at another time. So we made an object, and now let's put a material on the object, okay? So materials is the surface quality of something. It's not just going to be a color. It might have, like somebody's skin has pores and wrinkles and all different colors on it, and we build all these. Or a piece of wood might be a wooden table might be reflective and have wood grain, and we build all these qualities that we then, surface qualities that we then apply to our geometry. So the material editor is found under rendering, where is it? Material editor, okay? Rendering up in the main menu, material editor. We have the compact material editor and the slate material editor. The slate material editor is newer. It's like a flowchart style where you build the shape out of, the material out of, kind of like building it sort of like a flowchart fashion, I guess would be the best way to describe it. And you can do the same thing in either one. I think the compact material editor is easier to learn, and I actually use it most of the time anyway. So we're going to use that for the whole class. I tend to always do things, even though with computer graphics programs, there's a ton of different ways to do any one thing. I tend to always show you guys the same way to do something. It just makes it less confusing, and you just get that down really good, and then you can learn other ways to do things later. So anyway, compact material editor. Once you've opened it once, you can hit M, the letter M, to open it and close it. Okay. Now mine looks a little weird here, so which means it's looking at, because I've been using the Arnold renderer. Okay, there's different versions of 3ds Max have different external renderers. They're basically a software to render, to make the final rendering of the object, or renderings if it's an animation. And Autodesk occasionally will buy or partner with some other company to put the external renderer inside the program. Forever, it was Mental Ray, which I use quite a bit, but that ended a couple of years ago. And now it's Arnold. And I also use this Corona, which I pay for separately. But anyway, we don't want to work in Arnold. The external renderers are just kind of too complicated. It's better just to learn the scanline renderer first. It still makes great images. The external renderers give you some more power in different ways, but we're going to do scanline. So to change that, go rendering, render setup. And this thing should open up. And right here under renderer, see how mine says Arnold? I don't know if yours says that or not, okay? You want to be scanline renderer, okay? And that's what we're going to use. Hopefully yours defaults to that, I don't know. And these materials I have here now are all, since I opened the program with Arnold, it has Arnold materials, which won't really work. So I could just click on, you may not have to do this, okay? But I'm just going to click where it says physical material, and it opens the material map browser, and I just want a standard material. Let's see. Found under scanline standard. Okay, that's a standard material. Now yours may already have that. Okay. And I'm just going to apply it to my object. Okay, you can either drag it onto the object from this area, or this little thing here means assign material to selected. Okay, so now it's gray. And there's all kinds of maps that can be applied in here, and we'll spend a lot of time in the material editor. It's a whole career choice. It's very deep and wide. But if I change the diffuse color to something bright, you can see that it changes here. If I want to give it some kind of shiny highlight so it looks like a shiny object, these are just very simple changes I'm making here. Yeah. And if I want to make a rendering of the object, I'm just going to say F9. Okay, F9 actually means render last. Renders the last viewport that you rendered. Okay, or I can just go rendering, render setup, and render. Okay, and it will render the active viewport. So I think that's enough at the moment just to have a look around. We didn't really touch on animation or anything like that, but we'll go back and start looking at creating basic objects, more details of this, of how to select and transform things, et cetera, et cetera.